My daughter-in-law destroyed my life in the most brilliantly cruel way. She never laid a hand on me. Instead, she used innocent animals to do her dirty work. She's a veterinarian, but the way she treats both her patients and her mother-in-law will leave you questioning her very humanity. Are you curious to know what really happened? If you are, hit subscribe, like this video, and comment below to tell me where you're listening from. I'll gladly share the full story because the truth deserves to be heard. It was a calm autumn afternoon in Charleston. I was in the kitchen pouring hot water into my favorite porcelain teapot, the one my late husband gave me on our 15th anniversary. The smell of Earl Grey filled the air, wrapping around the house like a quiet embrace. This old home was my last piece of peace, the only thing that hadn't changed since he passed away. Then a piercing sound cut through the silence. It was Milo, my cat, screaming from the living room. Not meowing, screaming. My heart lurched. After years in nursing, I could tell the difference between fear and pain. That was pain. I set the cup down, hands trembling slightly, and walked toward the sound. As I reached the doorframe, I froze. Through the narrow crack, I saw a shadow moving violently. Something was being swung down again and again. Milo's cries grew weaker with each thud. I pushed the door open and switched on the light. The scene burned itself into my mind forever. Violet stood in the center of the room, her chest heaving, gripping a broom like a weapon. My sweet Milo was curled on the floor, trembling eyes wide with terror. Violet was a veterinarian, for heaven's sake. But the woman standing there was no healer. Her eyes were hollow cold and oddly satisfied, as if punishing something deeper than a cat. She spat out words that sliced the air. "The cat stole my food." I said nothing at first, then rushed forward, scooping Milo into my arms. My voice came out steady, though my insides shook. "He never steals food, Violet. You know that better than anyone." For a moment, her face twitched. The rage didn't match the situation. It was too sharp, too personal. As I held Milo close, I felt his fur. There were coarse strands mixed in unmistakable dog hair. From her German shepherd, the one she brought home just last week. His neck smelled faintly of spoiled meat and saliva. My chest tightened. Something had happened before the beating. Violet's eyes flicked toward me. Something strange flickering there, fear maybe, but also thrill. A small smile ghosted her lips, gone as fast as it came. I said nothing more. I simply turned, carrying Milo toward the sink, feeling his small body tremble against my chest. Inside my head, a cold realization formed, like frost, spreading on glass. Something is very wrong, and I will find out what it is. When Violet finally left the house, the door closing behind her with a soft click, I stayed perfectly still. The silence after her footsteps faded felt heavier than before. My hands moved almost on their own as I locked the living room door and walked toward my study. I sat down, turned on the computer, and opened the security footage I had quietly installed a month ago. I'd told everyone it was for safety, but deep down, I had felt a shift in the air since Violet moved in. Something about her calm, polite smile had always seemed rehearsed. The screen flickered, then came alive. The timestamp read 2:13 a.m. My breath caught. The dim image showed the kitchen, my kitchen lit by the pale glow of the refrigerator. The large German shepherd Violet had adopted was clawing at its crate, whining softly before forcing its way out. I watched frozen as it padded over to the fridge, pawed the handle open, and began pulling out food. Plastic containers fell to the floor. The dog tore them open and devoured everything in sight, making a mess across the tiles. But what sent a chill crawling up my spine wasn't the chaos. It was the reflection in the microwave door. In that glossy surface, just at the edge of the frame, stood Violet. She was still half hidden in the shadows, her face lit by the blue glow of her phone as she recorded the scene. There was a faint curve at the corner of her lips, something between amusement and triumph. She didn't stop the dog. She didn't even flinch. Then she whistled softly, almost playfully, a sound I recognized. It was the same tone she used to call Milo when she pretended to feed him treats. My throat tightened. The truth unfolded cruelly before my eyes. She was training the dog, setting it up, so that when food disappeared or got shredded, I would find the blame sitting conveniently on Milo's small shoulders. On the video, the dog looked up at her as if waiting for approval. She nodded, praised it with a low hum, and continued filming. I leaned back in my chair, feeling my heartbeat echo in my ears. My fingers trembled, but I clicked save, labeling the file quietly. 2:13 a.m. Violet. The truth was, they're cold and undeniable, staring back at me through the screen. I turned off the monitor and sat in the dark for a long while. The image of her smile burned into my mind. Something deeper than anger began to rise inside me, calm, sharp, and steady. Whatever she thought she was planning, I was no longer the woman she believed I was. Adrian had always been the kind of man who mistook quiet for peace. At 36, he worked long hours in an IT support office, solving other people's problems while avoiding his own. When he met Violet Rhodes at a clinic where he'd taken Milo for a routine checkup, he thought she was everything he had been missing. She was confident, articulate, and beautiful in a way that drew attention wherever she went. Within weeks, she seemed to know exactly what to say to make him feel seen. 6 months later, they were standing at an altar, promising forever. I still remember sitting in the front row, smiling for the photographs, though my chest felt tight the whole time. Maybe it was a mother's instinct, that invisible pull when something isn't right. Violet had that kind of beauty that came with calculation. Her eyes were always searching, measuring, as if she was already a step ahead in every conversation. She spoke often about independence, about how she'd worked hard for everything she owned, but I'd noticed her expensive handbags, the constant online deliveries, and the uneasy look on Adrian's face when bills came up. Later, I learned she had thousands in credit card debt hidden neatly behind her polished charm. Adrian, bless him, never asked the hard questions. He believed love meant trust, and trust meant not looking too closely. When she suggested moving in with me just until we save enough for a house, I agreed at first, thinking it would give them a safe start. She smiled, called it practical, but I saw the way she began organizing everything: my kitchen, my mail, even my grocery receipts. It wasn't help. It was control disguised as kindness. The wedding reception was small but cheerful. Family and friends filled the old backyard with laughter and light. Then Violet lifted her glass, leaned into Adrian's arm, and said with that charming laugh of hers, "Now that we're married, your mother's house is our house, right?" Everyone laughed politely, but something inside me went cold. There was a sharpness in her tone, a claim hidden behind the humor. I brushed it off at the time. Maybe I wanted to believe my son had found happiness. But that night, after everyone had gone home, I walked through the house alone. The air felt different, like a stranger had already moved in. I didn't yet know how right that feeling was. At first, everything seemed almost too perfect. Violet floated around the house like sunlight, always smiling, always saying the right thing. She'd cook dinner twice a week, sometimes 3, filling the kitchen with the scent of rosemary chicken or baked salmon. She'd call me Mom, bring me fresh fruit from the market, vitamin supplements, even a new cardigan one morning, saying she saw it and thought of me. Adrian beamed with pride every time. He'd say, "See, Mom, I told you she's wonderful." I smiled back, not wanting to dim his happiness. But sweetness can hide rot, and soon the shine began to fade. After dinner, Violet would disappear upstairs, leaving plates stacked in the sink, food drying on the pans. When I quietly started cleaning, she'd call down saying she was exhausted or had an early shift at the clinic. Her laughter echoed faintly through the hall, often from a phone call, not sleep. I tried not to judge. Everyone gets tired, I told myself. But the pattern never broke. Then came the small requests. Mom, could you help with the roof repair fund? Adrian said you keep an emergency savings. Or, I forgot my card at the clinic. Could you lend me gas money? She always promised to repay, and sometimes even handed me a folded envelope days later, light as air, with just a thank you card inside. Adrian didn't see it. To him, she was still the generous wife, busy, but loving. One afternoon, I found a receipt sticking out of her purse while setting the table. A luxury spa downtown. $280. I placed it back exactly where I found it, but that night I began a quiet habit, keeping every receipt, every grocery bill, every transfer note. 40 years in nursing had taught me that details matter. People lie, but paper doesn't. Violet's charm stayed polished in public. She'd bring flowers when Adrian's friends visited, praise my cooking in front of guests, even post photos of family dinners online. The captions read, "Love my sweet mother-in-law," while the sink behind her overflowed with unwashed dishes. Sometimes I caught her looking at me differently, like someone studying an opponent rather than sharing a home. There was a faint smirk, subtle but real, whenever she caught me noticing her carelessness. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was a game. She was testing boundaries, one small manipulation at a time. I never confronted her, not yet. Instead, I smiled, cleaned quietly, and kept my notes. Every bill went into a folder marked household. I didn't know it then, but those papers would one day speak louder than any argument. It started the day I said no. Violet had come into the kitchen, all smiles as usual, holding a grocery list, and a soft tone that didn't match the sharpness in her eyes. She asked for another few $100s, said the clinic had cut her shift hours, and she needed help just this once. I told her gently that I couldn't keep lending money. The room went quiet, like someone had switched off the air. Her smile didn't fade. It hardened. From that day forward, she stopped calling me Mom. It was Claire now. Short, flat, like a name she didn't want to say. At dinner, she began to speak differently. Not outright cruel, just edged. She'd glance at my hands when I reached for a serving spoon and say, "You're lucky you can still move around so well at your age." Or she'd laugh lightly and add, "Most people that old just sit back and let the younger ones handle money." The first few times I tried to brush it off, but every remark landed like a quiet slap. Adrian, as always, was too busy to notice. His job kept him at the office until late, and when he came home, Violet greeted him sweetly, serving him dinner as if nothing were wrong. If I mentioned tension, she'd tilt her head and sigh. "Oh, Claire's just been a little tired lately, haven't you?" And when I left the table, I could hear her whispering to him, soft enough to sound caring, clear enough to twist. "Your mom doesn't understand how much pressure we're under. She's been a bit difficult lately." He never confronted me, but I saw the way his eyes changed, less certain, more distant. I didn't blame him. Manipulation works best when wrapped in affection. So I stayed quiet. Instead of arguing, I started writing. Each evening after she and Adrian went upstairs, I opened my small, leather-bound journal and wrote down everything: dates, words, tones, even the time she came home. It wasn't anger that pushed me to do it. It was instinct. After 40 years in nursing, I knew how to recognize patterns of harm, and this felt like one. The chill in our home deepened over the weeks. She barely looked at me anymore, except to make sure I noticed her disdain. Meals became silent performances. I'd serve myself quietly while she checked her phone, smirking at something unseen. Sometimes she'd hum as she passed behind me, that same mocking tune she once used to calm the dog. Still, I smiled, thanked her when she remembered to buy milk, and went to bed early. I let her believe I was retreating. But every night under the warm light of my desk lamp, I wrote another line, another entry. Someday I knew those pages would matter. And when the truth came out, they did. Violet built her world out of appearances. Online, she was the image of compassion, a graceful veterinarian posting photos with rescued kittens and injured dogs. Her captions filled with hearts and hashtags about kindness. Saving those who can't speak for themselves, she'd write, followed by dozens of likes and admiring comments. But living under the same roof, I saw something those followers never would. She hated cats. She once muttered, not realizing I was nearby, that cats were selfish little creatures just like lonely old women who buy them for company. The words hung in the air like poison, sharp and personal. I didn't confront her then, but the sentence branded itself in my memory. When clients visited her clinic, she greeted them with radiant smiles, bent down to cuddle their pets, her voice dripping with warmth. But whispers followed her. One afternoon, my neighbor, Mrs. Howard, stopped me by the fence while trimming her roses. She had taken her cat to Violet's clinic the week before. "Claire," she said softly, "your daughter-in-law is polite, sure, but there's something cold in her eyes. I overheard one of the assistants say she loses her temper whenever cat hair touches her coat." I tried to smile, but something inside me shifted. I'd suspected vanity in Violet before, but not cruelty. That rumor planted a seed I couldn't ignore. At home, the tension became a living thing. Every time Milo wandered into the room, Violet's face changed. She'd clutch her chest or start coughing, pretending to wheeze. "I think I'm allergic," she'd say, pressing the back of her hand to her forehead. "Adrian, could you please put the cat away? I can't breathe like this." Her tone was soft, but commanding, the kind that made Adrian move before he even thought. He'd sigh, scoop Milo up, and lock him in the laundry room, whispering apologies through the door. I'd sit still, my hands folded in my lap, feeling Milo's faint scratching from behind the wall like a heartbeat I couldn't reach. Sometimes Violet caught my eye while pretending to cough. There'd be a flicker of amusement there, a spark, that told me she knew exactly what she was doing. It wasn't about allergies. It was about control. About proving that even the smallest living thing I loved could be turned against me. That night, I stood by the window and watched her from the driveway as she left for work. Her smile was back in place, her scrubs spotless, her phone raised to film herself with perfect lighting. On my way to save another furry baby, she chirped into the camera. The lie was so smooth it almost sounded true. But I'd seen enough of the woman behind it, the one who smiled for strangers and seethed at home. And that was when I knew the world saw a savior. I was living with a fraud. It was a Friday evening when Violet came home with the German Shepherd. The sound of its nails on the tile reached me before her voice did. "Look who I found," she said cheerfully, pushing the door open with one hand while holding the leash with the other. The dog was huge, easily 70 pounds, its coat glistening under the porch light. "His owner abandoned him," she added quickly, as if rehearsed. "He's been living behind the clinic for days. Poor thing, he just needs love." I stood by the kitchen counter, frozen. The scent of wet fur filled the house, strong and intrusive. "Violet," I said carefully, "this house is small. Milo's terrified of dogs. Bringing one in will only cause trouble." She smiled, that patient, condescending smile I had come to recognize. "He's gentle, Claire. You'll see. Dogs sense good people." Then she looked directly at me, letting the words linger just long enough to sting. That night, chaos arrived. The moment Adrian turned off the living room lights, the dog began pacing, whining, then scratching the furniture. Within minutes, the sound of ripping fabric echoed through the house. I rushed in and found the sofa shredded foam spilling like snow. The dog barked wildly, knocking over a lamp. Violet appeared at the doorway, acting startled. "Oh no. He must be anxious in a new environment," she said, feigning sympathy while scrolling on her phone. I could hear a faint cry from upstairs. Milo. When I found him under my bed, trembling and wide-eyed, my heart broke. I tried to coax him out, but he wouldn't move. He could still smell the dog downstairs, hear the heavy breathing and sharp claws. That gentle creature who once slept on my lap now hid like prey in his own home. The next morning, I asked Adrian to speak with Violet. He hesitated, rubbing his temples. "Mom, please. She's just trying to help an animal. You know how sensitive she is about these things." I stared at him, realizing how deep her influence had gone. "She's not helping Adrian. She's creating chaos." He sighed, defeated. "She's my wife, Mom. Maybe she just needs time to adjust." Time. That was the word everyone used when they didn't want to see the truth. I watched Violet from the kitchen window that afternoon, tossing a ball in the yard for the dog. She laughed when it growled, as if pleased by its aggression. The animal obeyed her completely, moving with the same sharp confidence she carried everywhere. And in that moment, I understood. Violet hadn't rescued the dog. She had recruited it. The creature wasn't a companion, it was her weapon. From that day on, peace left our house, replaced by the sound of claws, growls, and the quiet fear that crept into every corner. After our first real argument, Violet changed completely. It was as if she had pressed a switch and transformed into the perfect daughter-in-law. The next morning, she knocked softly on my door, her eyes wide with guilt. "I'm sorry about last night," she said sweetly, voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. "I didn't mean to upset you, Claire. I'll keep the dog in his crate from now on, I promise." She used my name again, never Mom, but with such gentle tone that Adrian, who stood behind her, smiled with relief. He reached for my shoulder, murmuring, "See, Mom, she just wants peace." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that maybe the chaos had simply been growing pains. So I nodded and accepted her apology. That evening, she cooked dinner. She even set the table with candles and poured me tea, all calm smiles and soft laughter. Adrian looked happier than he had in weeks. "See, the house feels lighter already," he said. Violet leaned into his arm, giving me a warm, practiced smile. "I just want Mom to have a cleaner, quieter space. I know how much she values peace." It was the kind of sentence that left no room to argue, flattering, yet edged with accusation. I kept my face still, pretending to let it go. When night came, I checked the living room before bed. The dog was locked inside his metal crate, resting its head on its paws. I made sure the latch was secure, then went upstairs. Around midnight, I woke to a faint sound, soft scratching, followed by heavy breathing. I held my breath and listened. The wooden floorboards creaked below, slow and deliberate. Then came the low growl, deep and wet, rolling from the kitchen. I turned on the lamp and sat up, heart pounding. It wasn't imagination. The dog was out. In the morning, the proof was everywhere. The trash can was overturned plastic, scattered across the floor. Deep claw marks ran along the side of the refrigerator. A half-eaten loaf of bread lay under the counter. Dog hair clung to the carpet like gray threads of warning. I stood silently staring at the mess when Violet walked in wearing her robe, holding a cup of coffee. She didn't look surprised. She took one slow sip, then smiled faintly. "Looks like your cat had quite an adventure," she said lightly. "Maybe he dreamed about catching a mouse." Her tone was playful, but her eyes didn't match cold, deliberate knowing exactly what she was doing. That was the beginning of sleepless nights. Every creak of the floor, every faint rustle in the dark made me tense. The house that had once been my refuge now felt like a cage where something prowled after midnight. And Violet, with her gentle voice and morning smiles, was the one holding the key. Every morning began the same way. I would wake before sunrise hoping for peace, and instead find a battlefield. The milk carton torn open on the counter, the rug stained with vomit, the dog's crate door hanging ajar as if someone had forgotten to lock it. And always, always Violet standing nearby with that calm, innocent expression. Poor Milo, she'd sigh, pretending concern. He must have gotten scared again. Then she'd wrinkle her nose slightly, adding, "You know, Claire, the smell of cats makes my throat itch. I think I'm allergic." At first, I tried to reason with her. He's been trained for years. He never does this, I said. But she only smiled sweetly, coughing into her sleeve. Maybe he's getting old. Or maybe she paused, lowering her voice. He just needs more attention. Soon the requests began. "Adrian, could you take the cat to Mom's friend for a few days?" she'd say when my son came home from work. "Just to test if my allergies improve." Adrian, tired and eager to keep peace, would glance at me helplessly. "It's only temporary, Mom." He'd insist, voice caught between guilt and loyalty. Each time I refused quietly, and each refusal tightened the invisible rope around me a little more. Then came the video. One afternoon, I heard a thud in the kitchen and rushed in. Violet was kneeling by the fridge, paper towels in hand, milk spreading across the floor. "Oh no, look what happened," she said, tone light camera already in her hand. Before I could even speak, she filmed the mess, the open fridge and the dog sniffing the puddle nearby. Later that night, Adrian received the clip with a caption that made my stomach turn. "Mom forgot to feed the cat again. It went crazy looking for food." It was subtle, too small for confrontation, too frequent to ignore. A series of little accidents, each one slightly eroding trust. Adrian started looking at me differently, not unkindly, but uncertain. When I said the dog had been out at night, he frowned, hesitating. "Maybe you forgot to close the crate, Mom. You've had a lot on your mind." That sentence stung more than anything Violet had ever said. Day by day, the house stopped feeling like mine. The furniture I chose, the walls I painted, even the scent of lavender I used to love, all of it began to feel foreign. I caught myself whispering to Milo late at night, his fur warm against my hand. "They think you're the problem," I told him softly. But I know better. By then, I understood Violet's game. Lies, when repeated quietly and often enough, can replace truth. And I could feel her shaping the story, turning me from the homeowner into the guest, from the mother into the nuisance. Dinner had become a performance. Violet played her part perfectly, her voice sweet and practiced. "Adrian," she said one evening as she refilled his glass, "your mom has done enough. She should really rest more. I'll take care of the house from now on." The words were wrapped in kindness, but her tone carried something sharp underneath. I felt every eye at the table turn toward me. My instinct was to respond, to remind her this was my home and I was far from helpless. But I swallowed the words. I could already hear how it would sound to my son, his mother snapping at his wife for trying to help. So I smiled instead, a small, polite smile that didn't reach my eyes. Adrian looked relieved. He hated conflict more than anything. "That sounds good," he said softly, avoiding my gaze. "Maybe we all just need to take it easy." I could see the exhaustion in his face, the way he folded into silence, hoping it would keep the peace. But peace built on silence never lasts. It just gives the wrong person power. From that night on, Violet began to claim the house piece by piece. She started with the kitchen. One morning, I reached for the refrigerator handle, only to find it locked with a small silver latch. When I asked, she smiled and said, "Oh, it's just temporary. I'm keeping the dog from getting into food. You know how clever he is." Later that day, I noticed the neatly labeled containers inside Violet's breakfast. Violet's vitamins do not touch. It wasn't about the dog. It was about ownership. Then came the cameras. Small black domes appeared in corners, plastic, cheap-looking, but positioned just so. Fake cameras, she called them, laughing, to scare Milo away from the counters. But the way she installed them, always facing the places I spent the most time, the pantry, the sink, even the hallway to my room, made my stomach twist. The air in the house changed. I began to move quietly, cautious of every sound. My footsteps softened, my breathing measured. I felt like a guest walking through someone else's home, someone watching from the shadows. Still, I kept my composure. Rage would have been easy, but rage was what Violet wanted. She wanted me to snap to give her proof that I was difficult, unstable, controlling. So instead, I wrote. I cleaned. I observed. Each change she made, each rule she enforced, I noted carefully in my journal. I told myself the same thing every night as I folded the pages away. The truth doesn't need noise, it needs patience. Let her play her game. When the time comes, I'll end it with reason, not anger. The morning after another argument about Milo, I sat alone in the living room staring at the faint scratches on the refrigerator door. Something inside me shifted. I had spent months cleaning, forgiving, pretending not to notice. But that morning, I decided it was time to stop surviving and start preparing. I went online and ordered a small security camera, nothing fancy, but discreet, silent, and reliable. When it arrived 2 days later, I hid it inside the tall potted fern near the window, the leaves spilling just enough to conceal the lens. From that angle, it captured the entire kitchen and the dog's crate. I didn't tell Adrian. I didn't tell anyone. I even left the old fake cameras Violet had installed untouched, knowing she liked to believe she was the only one watching. My camera, though, uploaded everything to the cloud. I had learned enough from 40 years of medical work to know evidence only mattered if it was safe. If she ever found it, she could break the device, but not the truth it carried. Each night before bed, I wrote in my journal just as I had for weeks. But now my notes became precise, clinical. I logged the times I heard footsteps after midnight, the hour the trash can was overturned, the exact words she used when she mocked me. "Your cat's becoming a problem, Claire. Maybe you're too old to notice what's going on." I documented every detail, no matter how small. The habit came naturally. Nurses live on documentation. I had once written charts that decided the difference between life and death. Now I was writing a record of deceit. At first, it felt lonely, this secret. I was playing a quiet game against a woman who believed she was untouchable. But slowly, that loneliness turned into focus. Every new entry, every video clip was a step toward reclaiming my home. I stopped reacting to Violet's taunts. When she accused Milo of breaking a vase, I simply nodded, cleaned the shards, and wrote it down, later time tone expression. It all went into the file. Weeks passed, and the footage grew. The dog, wandering free at night. Violet leaving the crate open. Her laughing softly while pushing a chair toward the counter, setting up the next accident. Each clip told the story she thought she'd hidden too well. Watching it, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt clarity. I was no longer the quiet, aging woman everyone assumed I was. I was building a case. A quiet, meticulous case that would one day speak louder than any scream. When the moment came, I wouldn't need to argue or beg for belief. I would simply show them what had always been true. The footage began like any other night. Grainy, quiet, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I had almost stopped expecting to find anything new. But then at 2:13 in the morning, the motion sensor flickered. I leaned forward, breath caught in my throat. The dog's crate door swung open slow at first, then wide as the German Shepherd pushed its way out. It prowled toward the kitchen counter muscles, shifting under its fur nose, twitching as it sniffed the air. Then, without hesitation, it lunged at the pantry, clawing and tearing into the bag of dry food I'd bought the day before. I pressed pause. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. In the corner of the frame, something shimmered, a reflection on the stainless steel door of the microwave. I zoomed in. My fingers trembled. And there she was. Violet. Standing half hidden in the shadows, arms folded, her face faintly illuminated by the kitchen's dim nightlight. She wasn't surprised. She was watching, studying. Her lips curved almost imperceptibly into a smile. When the dog ripped open the bag and sent pieces flying across the floor, she actually laughed quietly, softly. But it was there. I rewound the footage, slowing it down frame by frame. My pulse thudded with every click. At 2 minutes 16 seconds, she moved closer. The reflection caught her full profile this time. I could see her lift her hand, slightly fingers gesturing upward. The dog immediately obeyed, standing on its hind legs and pawing the counter until a pack of frozen meat tumbled out. My stomach turned cold. That wasn't instinct. That was command. I zoomed in again, adjusting the light. There was no mistake she was signaling the animal, training it, encouraging it. Under any legal lens, it was training for malicious damage. She wasn't just allowing destruction, she was orchestrating it. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. The air around me felt heavy, pressing down on my chest. I had suspected cruelty before, but this was something else, something deliberate. She wasn't trying to hurt the dog or even Milo anymore. She was using them. Every overturned bin, every mess, every accusation, it was all part of a larger game, a test of control. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My hands were cold, my breath shallow. I felt a strange mix of horror and clarity. The woman living under my roof, the one who smiled at my son, who called me Claire in that sugary tone, had been manipulating everything from the start. She wasn't fighting for space, she was erasing me from my own home, one small act at a time. And now, for the first time, I had proof. The tears came before I even realized I was crying. They slipped down my cheeks, silently warm against the cold light of the monitor. For months, I had convinced myself that Violet was simply careless, not cruel. That her behavior, the messes, the lies, the subtle jabs, came from inexperience, not malice. But now the truth stared back at me in perfect clarity, captured in pixels and shadows. My breath hitched, and I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop the sob from escaping. The woman I had welcomed into my home, the one I had tried so hard to accept, had been orchestrating every humiliation from the start. I whispered into the empty room, my voice trembling. A veterinarian. Someone who swore to protect animals. And she does this. The question wasn't for anyone but myself, yet it echoed sharp and bitter. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand and reached for my old leather-bound notebook, the same one I used years ago when tracking patient vitals on the night shift. Its pages were yellowed, but my handwriting still felt steady. I opened to a blank page and began to write date, time, behavior, evidence. Every instinct I had, honed from 4 decades in nursing, resurfaced. I couldn't afford to react out of anger or fear. This wasn't just a family conflict anymore, it was documentation. Proof. I wrote down everything. 13 a.m., German Shepherd released. Violet present, directing behavior. I described the gestures, the smirk, the laughter. My pulse still raced, but my mind was calm, methodical. Nurses are trained to think under pressure to record facts before emotion clouds the details. And tonight, that discipline was my armor. When I finished the notes, I turned back to the computer. The footage was still paused at the frame where Violet's smile glimmered in the reflection of the microwave. I took a slow breath and began saving it. One copy to my computer, one to a USB drive, and another uploaded to cloud storage. My hands were steady now. If Violet ever discovered what I'd seen, I knew she'd try to erase it. But she couldn't erase everything. Not anymore. As the progress bar filled, I sat quietly listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. For the first time in months, the house felt still, not safe, not yet, but steady. My anger hadn't vanished. It had simply hardened into resolve. I closed the notebook, slid the USB into a drawer, and whispered softly to myself, "You started this, Violet, but I'll be the one to finish it." I held the phone in my trembling hand, the screen glowing in the dim light of my study. My voice came out rough from sleepless nights, but steady enough to sound composed. "Adrian, I said you need to see something. I'm not lying and I'm not imagining things." There was a pause on the other end, a quiet sigh, the kind that carries both love and exhaustion. "Mom," he murmured. "What is it now?" I didn't argue. I simply sent him the video file. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the connection. Then I heard the click as he opened it. Silence followed 2 full minutes of it. I imagined him sitting at his desk, eyes glued to the screen, watching his wife, the woman he defended for months, stand in the shadows while her dog tore apart my kitchen. I pictured the disbelief breaking across his face as the reflection revealed her smirk, the small hand signal, the quiet laugh. Finally, he spoke. His voice cracked. "No. No, that can't be real." "Violet, why would she do that?" I didn't answer. There was nothing left to explain. The truth was there in front of him, as sharp and undeniable as glass. For years, I had been the one accused of overreacting, of imagining problems. Now he could see what I had seen, what I had lived. I heard him breathing hard through the receiver, the sound of a man whose world was starting to crumble. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm so sorry. I didn't believe you. I should have." His words faded into a long exhale. "It's not about believing me anymore," I said quietly. "It's about what you do next." He promised he would come home and talk to her, get the truth straight. His voice carried guilt, but also hesitation. I could hear it, the hope that maybe there was an explanation, that this was all a mistake he could fix with calm reasoning. That's how he'd always been: patient, rational, desperate to avoid confrontation. My son had inherited his father's quiet heart, the kind that forgave too easily. "Don't argue with her tonight," I warned softly. "Just listen and be careful." He promised again, his tone heavy, but still uncertain. After we hung up, I stared at the phone for a long time. I knew what he was thinking, how every part of him wanted to believe his wife wasn't capable of cruelty. That small, loyal part of a son who doesn't want to see the evil living under his own roof. And I also knew Violet would feel that weakness like blood in the water. She would use it, twist it, turn his compassion against him. But the difference now was this: I wasn't fighting alone anymore. When Adrian came home that evening, the air in the house felt unnaturally calm. The soft sound of music floated from the kitchen, something classical measured almost too serene. Violet stood by the counter wearing her pale blue sweater, gently spooning food into the German Shepherd's bowl. She looked perfectly composed, as if she'd been waiting for him. When he entered, she turned slightly, her smile small and polite. "You're home early," she said, as if nothing had happened. Adrian didn't answer right away. He pulled his phone from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. The screen was still paused on the image of her reflection in the microwave, the faint smile, the raised hand, the dog obeying her command. His voice came out low, almost flat. "Explain this." For a second, her face didn't change. Then she looked at the phone's side and shook her head with exaggerated patience. "Oh, Adrian," she said softly. "You really think that means anything? I was training him, that's all. You know how protective he is at night. Your mother took it the wrong way." He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. She took a step closer, lowering her voice to something fragile, almost trembling. "She hates me, Adrian. You know that. No matter what I do, she twists it. Do you really believe I'd hurt anyone, that I'd hurt a poor animal?" Adrian stared at the counter, torn between disbelief and confusion. He wanted to be angry, but her tone was calm. Her logic rehearsed, her eyes wet but steady. Violet sensed his hesitation. It was the opening she needed. She let out a shaky breath, her voice breaking at just the right moment. "I can't live like this. Always being watched, always being accused. If you think she's right, I'll go. I'll take my things and you can stay here. Take care of her by yourself." The words hung in the air like a blade. Adrian looked up, startled. "Violet, that's not what I said." But she was already crying perfect, controlled tears. "I just wanted to be part of this family. I thought marrying you meant love, not tests." She turned away, her shoulders trembling. The dog nudged her leg, whining softly, as if on cue. Adrian hesitated. He wanted to demand the truth, but instead he reached out and touched her arm gently. "Let's just not argue tonight," he murmured. "I need to think." Violet nodded, wiping her eyes, her lips curving into the faintest smile once his back was turned. She had won this round, and she knew it. Adrian walked out of the kitchen, head bowed, unaware that his silence had just become her strongest weapon. The next morning, the house felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Adrian stood in the doorway, suitcase by his side, eyes heavy with guilt. "Mom," he began softly, "I think everyone just needs some space. I found a small apartment downtown. It's temporary, just until things calm down." His tone was careful, rehearsed, the kind people use when they're afraid the truth will hurt someone. I nodded slowly, my hands clasped in front of me. "You're taking Violet with you?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He looked away. "It'll be easier if I do. Maybe some distance will help. Maybe once things settle, we can all start over." His voice trailed off as if even he didn't believe it. Violet appeared behind him, perfectly composed in a cream sweater and subtle perfume. Her expression, the very image of reason. "It's for the best, Claire," she said with a sweet, measured smile. "You'll finally have some quiet, and I'll have time to rebuild our trust." Her words dripped with false grace. But in her eyes, those calm, polished eyes, I saw the glint of triumph. She had won this round, and she knew it. With Adrian by her side, she had power. Without him, she had freedom. Adrian kissed my cheek gently. "Mom, please don't be upset. This isn't goodbye. It's just time to breathe." I wanted to tell him that peace built on deception always collapses. I wanted to scream that he was walking straight into her trap. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled faintly and placed my hand over his. "Go, Adrian. You'll see the truth when it's ready to be seen." He nodded, relieved by my calm, mistaking composure for acceptance. Moments later, the door closed behind them. The echo lingered in the hallway long after their footsteps faded. For a while I stood there, the quiet pressing against me. Then I turned toward the living room. Milo was curled up beneath the armchair, his fur bristling, his small body trembling. I knelt beside him, running my fingers gently along his back until he stopped shaking. "It's all right, my dear," I whispered. "We'll wait. We'll survive." Outside, the morning light poured through the window, sharp and unforgiving. I straightened up, looking around the house that suddenly felt both empty and alive with tension. The lies had driven them away, but they had also left room for truth to take root. I looked at the door one last time and said quietly, more to myself than anyone else, if a war begins with lies, then truth will be the thing that ends it. For the first few nights after Adrian moved out, I finally slept through without waking to the sound of claws on the floor or muffled footsteps in the hall. The house felt like itself again, quiet, steady breathing with me instead of against me. Milo began eating properly, stretching in the morning sunlight, curling up beside my chair like he used to. I thought maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed. But evil has a way of finding its way back home. It was a Friday morning, cold and still. I was watering the fern in the living room, the same one that hid my camera, when I heard the low hum of an engine outside. Tires crunched over gravel, slow and deliberate. My stomach tightened before I even looked. Through the window, I saw Violet's white SUV gliding to a stop in front of the gate. She stepped out gracefully, wearing her white veterinary coat, as if she'd come straight from work. Her smile was practiced polite, the kind that hides more than it reveals. "Claire," she called, waving cheerfully. "I just came to pick up a few things I left behind." The words sounded harmless, but my instincts screamed otherwise. Beside her stood the German Shepherd, the same one that had terrorized Milo. Except now it looked different. Its ears, rigid movements, jerky foam glistening at the corners of its mouth. It wasn't wagging its tail. It was waiting, watching. I hesitated at the door. Every part of me wanted to keep it locked to pretend I wasn't home. But I knew better. In this country, even a locked door can be used against you. If she decided to claim I'd denied her access to her belongings, she could drag me into court. And Violet knew that. She was counting on it. I took a deep breath and unlatched the lock. "Make it quick," I said through the screen door. Her smile widened. "Of course. I just need a few personal things." She walked past me, the dog's nails clicking against the floor like a metronome. Milo bolted under the sofa the second it entered. I kept my distance, pretending to tidy the kitchen counter while my mind worked fast. I noted everything. Her tone, her posture, the way she tugged the leash tighter whenever the dog's focus drifted toward me. I recorded the date and time on a scrap of paper hidden in my apron pocket. Evidence mattered more than fear. When she finished, Violet turned to me with that same syrupy tone. "I'm glad you're doing well, Claire. It must be quiet without us here." I met her eyes, steady and unblinking. "Quiet is good," I said. "Quiet tells the truth." Her smile flickered just for a second, and I knew she understood this wasn't the same woman she'd once cornered. As she left, I watched from the window, heart pounding, already planning what to do next. The war wasn't over, it had just changed shape. The moment the dog stepped through the doorway, I knew something was wrong. Its breathing was fast, uneven, too shallow for normal excitement. Foam clung to the corners of its mouth, and its eyes, bloodshot and wild, darted from corner to corner like it couldn't focus. Its pupils were fully dilated, nearly black, the way I'd seen in patients under the influence of stimulants. Then came the low growl, deep, continuous, almost mechanical. Every instinct in me screamed that this was not just a frightened animal. Something chemical was coursing through its body. Violet bent down beside it, her tone soft and sweet, the same performance she always used when she wanted to look innocent. "Poor baby," she cooed. "He's been anxious since yesterday, that's all." The move unsettled him. She ran her hand along its neck fingers, brushing the collar as if to soothe it. But I noticed something else. Her hand trembled slightly, and the smile she forced didn't quite reach her eyes. I took a cautious step closer, pretending concern, while watching every movement. On her nails, faint traces of white powder caught the morning light. At first, I thought it was dust from her clinic, or even makeup. But then I saw how it clung to the creases of her fingertips, thick and grainy, the way sedative residue did when mixed improperly. My stomach tightened. That wasn't chalk or cosmetic powder. It was veterinary tranquilizer, the kind used for large animals. Too much of it could cause neurological agitation instead of calm. In the wrong dose, it didn't subdue, it provoked. I'd seen it before. Years ago, a junior vet at the hospital had mishandled a sedative compound, leaving a dog shaking, snarling at its own reflection. The symptoms were the same: dilated pupils, frothing mouth, erratic breathing. And now those same signs were staring back at me from this creature's distorted gaze. Violet caught me looking. "What's wrong?" she asked, voice perfectly casual. "You're staring like I brought home a monster." I forced a small smile, steadying my tone. "No, just thinking like an old nurse, that's all." "He seems overstimulated." She laughed softly, but it was thin, brittle. "You worry too much, Claire. He's fine." But I could see the tension in her jaw, the subtle way she pulled her sleeve down to hide her wrist, where faint scratches trailed like marks of a struggle. She wasn't afraid of the dog, she was testing it. Inside, my pulse raced. The pieces fit together too easily, her sudden visit, the aggressive posture of the animal, the powder on her hands. She wasn't here to collect a few things. She was here to see if her little experiment worked. As the dog's growl deepened, I felt a chill spread across my spine. A single question formed in my mind, sharp as ice. Was she trying to turn her own pet into a weapon? The front door creaked open just as the tension reached its peak. Claire, a familiar voice, called out, steady, calm, but carrying an edge that made me exhale with relief. My brother, Grant Jennings, stood in the doorway, broad-shouldered and weathered from years of service. He had spent 2 decades in the K-9 unit training police dogs to track, defend, and protect. If anyone understood what was happening in this room, it was him. He stepped inside, scanning the scene in a single glance. Violet stood by the kitchen counter, holding the leash taut, her smile tight. The German Shepherd's breathing was loud, uneven, almost snarling with every exhale. Grant's expression hardened instantly. "Claire," he said sharply, "step back. That dog isn't right." I froze. He moved closer, his voice lower now, deliberate. "He's not just agitated, he's been dosed." Violet gave a light laugh, too high-pitched. "Oh, please. He's fine. I'm a vet, remember? You must be mistaken." But Grant wasn't listening to her. He crouched slightly, watching the animal's stance, its shifting weight, the twitch in its tail. His eyes narrowed when he noticed a small, shaved patch of fur at the base of the dog's neck, a pinprick mark barely visible under the light. "There," he muttered, pointing. "That's an injection site." He caught a faint metallic scent in the air, chemical, bitter, and sharp. His jaw tightened. "Can stim," he said almost to himself. "God damn it. They banned that stuff years ago." I blinked, my stomach twisting. "What does it do?" "It overstimulates the nervous system. Makes the animal hyper-aware, unpredictable. You can train it to attack anything that moves." His eyes flicked toward Violet. "Or anyone." The dog gave a sudden jerk forward, growling low foam bubbling at its mouth. Grant's instincts kicked in immediately. He lifted a hand firm and calm, signaling me to retreat. "Go to your room, Claire," he ordered. "Now, lock the door." I didn't argue. I took a step back, then another, my heart hammering. As I moved down the hallway, I saw him pull his phone from his jacket and quietly switch on the camera. He kept his body angled between Violet and the dog, voice steady. "Ma'am," he said, slipping into his old police tone, "I need you to keep your distance and control that animal." Violet's smile faltered. "You can't talk to me like that in my own family's house." Grant didn't answer. The phone camera glinted faintly in his hand, already recording. He wasn't just protecting me now, he was gathering evidence. And Violet seemed to realize it, her grip tightening on the leash as the dog's growl deepened. From behind the door, I heard his voice one last time, low and certain. You picked the wrong house to play this game in." Grant's voice came out firm and commanding, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Violet," he said loudly through the half-open door, "I've called animal control. You should leave now unless you want to be arrested for animal cruelty." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then Violet's face drained of color. Her composure cracked. You can't do that," she stammered, glancing toward the window as if searching for a way out. But Grant didn't move, didn't shout, didn't even raise his hand. He simply stood his ground, calm and immovable, the way men trained to handle danger always are. The dog sensed her panic before anyone else did. Its eyes rolled, its breathing grew ragged, and then it started barking, deep, frantic, uncontrollable. Violet tugged at the leash, but the animal was too strong. It lunged forward, its body slamming into the glass door so hard the frame shuddered. Violet stumbled back with a gasp, nearly losing her balance. "Stop it! Sit!" she screamed, but her voice only made it worse. The dog's movements grew more violent, snapping at the air, saliva flying. From behind the door, I could hear everything: the barks, the scraping claws, Violet's frantic shouting. Grant, meanwhile, had already raised his phone, his hand steady. He adjusted his stance, keeping a safe distance, but ensuring a full, unobstructed view. Every second was captured the erratic behavior of the dog, the trembling of Violet's hand, the flash of white powder still faintly clinging to her nails. "Perfect," he muttered quietly, his years of fieldwork coming back in full. He zoomed in, documenting everything, like evidence at a crime scene. This wasn't chaos anymore, it was control. He was writing the narrative that would later expose her. Moments later, the distant sound of sirens grew louder. Blue and red lights reflected across the window panes. Violet froze, breathing hard, her confidence shattered. "This is ridiculous," she hissed, trying to pull the dog back toward the car, but the animal resisted, barking louder, spinning in circles. Grant stepped forward just as the police car pulled up. Two officers emerged, one holding a tranquilizer pole, the other scanning the situation. Grant handed his phone to the officer with a practiced motion. "You'll want to see this," he said calmly. "The animal's been chemically stimulated. There's a puncture near the neck, likely injected with CanStim or something similar. I can testify." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Are you a vet?" Former K-9 trainer Grant replied, his tone clipped. "And this isn't an accident. It's an attempted assault using an animal under chemical influence." As the officers moved in, Violet's protests turned into pleas. But it was too late. Grant had turned her own weapon against her, not through strength, but through evidence. I drove to the lawyer's office with a paper bag of evidence on my lap. Grant sat beside me, silent but steady. Inside the bag were the USB drive, my notebook filled with dates and details, and a sealed container with the leftover food from the crate. When we arrived, Emmett Grant, our lawyer, and Grant's old partner from K-9 cases, welcomed us into his office. He looked through the materials carefully, page by page, frame by frame. His expression grew sharper with every passing minute. Grant explained the dog's symptoms, the injection mark, and the smell of the banned drug. I described the nights of noise fear and how Violet had staged every accident. Emmett leaned back in his chair and spoke clearly. "If toxicology confirms stimulant drugs, we can charge her with animal abuse with intent to harm and reckless endangerment of a senior citizen." His words carried weight. They didn't sound theoretical, but inevitable. The air in the office grew still. For the first time, I felt that the nightmare might have a path toward justice. Emmett instructed us to keep the samples under strict chain of custody. He would send them to a certified lab for testing that same day. He also promised to file an emergency order so Violet couldn't delete data, destroy property, or come near my house again. When I asked about a civil case, he nodded. "We can pursue both," he said. "Animal cruelty will stand in criminal court. Elder abuse and damages can run in civil court. She won't escape either side." His tone was calm, practical, but I could sense the quiet outrage beneath it. After leaving his office, I called the Animal Legal Defense Fund, a nonprofit that protects animal rights. I left a message, then sent an email with the evidence attached. I asked them to guide me on media strategy when the case went public. I didn't want headlines or drama. I wanted the truth to be told with dignity. Within a few hours, they replied offering to help shape the story so that both animal cruelty and elder abuse could be exposed properly, not sensationalized. That evening back at home, I sat at the kitchen table with Milo curled around my feet. The house felt quieter, but stronger, as if the walls themselves understood something was finally changing. Grant poured tea and said he'd testify as a witness. He would confirm the signs of chemical stimulation, the injection site, and the behavior pattern of the dog. Emmett had already arranged for the lab pickup and sworn statements later that week. Before signing the official report, I looked down at Milo, his small gray head resting on my slipper. "She tried to use that dog to frighten us," I said softly. "But now that same dog will be the witness that takes everything away from her." The day of the confrontation was brighter than it should have been. The sky was calm, the air sharp with the scent of early spring. But beneath that stillness, I could feel something electric, like the world was holding its breath. 2 police cars pulled up in front of my house, their red and blue lights flashing softly. Beside them was a familiar figure stepping out of a black sedan, Emmett Grant, my old friend, and now my lawyer. He gave me a small nod, the kind that said, "It's time." Minutes later, Violet's car appeared at the end of the street. She parked crookedly, as if in a rush, and stepped out wearing that same polished smile she always used when pretending to be in control. "Claire," she called out, her voice dripping with false calm. "I heard the police were here. I think there's been a misunderstanding, and I'd like to explain." But she didn't get far. Emmett turned toward her, professional and composed. "You'll have a chance to explain," he said evenly, "but you might want to watch this first." He signaled one of the officers who handed him a tablet. With a swipe, he opened a video file footage from the outdoor camera at the motel where Violet had been staying. The screen came alive with color, and everyone could see it clearly. Violet crouched beside a metal food bowl, pouring a liquid from a syringe into the dog's meal. Then came the sound, her voice unmistakable, laughing into her phone. This time she said, her tone playful and cruel, "That old woman will lose her mind with fear." The moment hung heavy. The faint hum of the wind filled the silence. Violet's smile froze, then crumbled. "That's not what it looks like," she stammered, her voice breaking. I was just giving vitamins. Someone must have edited that." But Grant stepped forward before she could finish. His voice was calm, but cutting. "Save it, Violet. The lab results came back this morning." He held up a folder with the official seal of the county toxicology unit. "The food you left contained traces of CanStim, the same neurostimulant banned for veterinary use. And the injection site on your dog's neck matched the chemical pattern." The officers exchanged glances. Then one of them moved forward, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "Violet Rhodes," the officer said, his tone firm and formal. "You are under arrest for animal abuse with intent to harm and reckless endangerment of a senior citizen." Violet's face drained of color. "No, wait, please, I didn't mean—" The officer read her rights as she protested weakly. Emmett folded his hands, silent. Grant stood beside him, steady as stone. And I, for the first time in months, felt the weight lift off my chest. I looked at her one last time, my voice low and even. "You never loved animals, Violet," I said. "You just used them as weapons to hurt others." The wind rustled through the magnolia tree as the police car door closed. For once, the house was truly silent and free. Violet's downfall came quietly but completely. The trial lasted only a few weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. The video footage, the toxicology reports, Grant's testimony, and my written journal all aligned with frightening precision. Even Violet's defense attorney struggled to find a way to soften what the court had seen and heard. When the verdict was read, she stood frozen lips pressed tightly together, her once perfect composure replaced by a hollow stare. The judge's voice was firm, guilty of animal cruelty and intentional endangerment. Her sentence, 2 years of probation, a suspended jail term, and the permanent revocation of her veterinary license rang through the courtroom like a verdict on her soul. The title Dr. Violet Rhodes was gone, stripped from every certificate and plaque she'd ever displayed so proudly. The state board publicly announced her suspension, and soon her former clients learned the truth. The clinic where she once worked replaced her name with a quiet notice, "Position vacant." It was the kind of punishment that doesn't just take away freedom, it takes away identity. Adrian sat beside me during the final hearing, his hands clasped tightly, his face pale and drawn. He didn't speak much, but the tremor in his voice when he finally whispered, "Mom, you were right," said everything. There was no pride in his tone, only heartbreak. For months, he had believed in Violet's innocence, defending her to friends, to himself, even to me. Now, watching her led out of the courtroom, he saw not a misunderstood woman, but a manipulator who had used love like a leash. A week later, I watched him sign the divorce papers at the kitchen table. His signature shook halfway through the page. "I thought she needed saving," he said quietly, "but she was the one drowning me." I didn't reply. Some truths don't need words. When it was done, Adrian took a deep breath, almost as if surfacing after a long dive. "I want to stay here for a while if that's okay," he said. I smiled gently and nodded. Milo brushed against his leg, purring softly, as if sensing that forgiveness had already begun. Violet's name eventually faded from headlines, but her shadow lingered as a reminder of how cruelty can disguise itself as care. And for me, justice didn't feel like triumph. It felt like release. The house was finally peaceful again. The fear was gone, replaced by something quieter and stronger dignity. The weeks that followed felt like waking from a long, heavy dream. For the first time in months, I could open the windows and let the wind move freely through the house. The scent of lavender returned to the air instead of fear. Milo, once too frightened to leave the corner of the living room, now wandered the hallways again, his tail high, his steps light. Every morning, he waited by the window for the sunbeam that stretched across the floor, the same spot he used to nap in before all the chaos began. Watching him curl up there again felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The German Shepherd, too, found a second chance. Under Grant's supervision, Animal Control transferred the dog to a professional training center out of town. The trainers evaluated it carefully, detoxified its system, and began a rehabilitation program. They later told me that after weeks of patient care, it was no longer aggressive, just confused, scarred by the hands that once claimed to love it. When I received the call that it had been adopted by a retired firefighter, I felt tears in my eyes. Even something born out of cruelty could find peace if given the chance. Emmett Grant, steady as ever, helped me navigate the final legal steps. He secured the full deed to my home in my name, ensuring Violet could never use old documents or claims to dispute ownership. He also filed a permanent restraining order, a quiet line in the sand that would keep her away for good. When I signed the final papers, Emmett said gently, "You didn't just protect your property, Claire. You protected your peace." And he was right. A week later, the local newspaper ran a story on the case. The headline read, "Cruel Vet Exposed Woman Uses Dog as Weapon Against Her Mother-in-Law." Beneath it was a photo of Violet leaving the courthouse, eyes down, surrounded by flashing cameras. The town was stunned. People who once took their pets to her clinic expressed disbelief and outrage. The paper called it one of the most disturbing cases of psychological and animal abuse in years. But for me, it wasn't about public opinion anymore. It was about truth finally standing on its own. At dusk, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, Milo purring softly beside me. The garden smelled of soil and spring rain. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to look over my shoulder. The world was still imperfect, but it was finally safe. The afternoon light settled softly over the porch, painting everything in a calm gold. I sat there with Milo on my lap, his fur warm beneath my hand, his steady purr blending with the rustle of the wind. The air smelled faintly of lavender, the same scent that once filled the house before everything fell apart. I opened my old leather-bound journal, its pages slightly yellowed, and began to write. My pen moved slowly, almost as if guided by memory itself. Not every wound comes from claws, I wrote. Some bites are born from jealousy. I paused for a moment, watching the ink dry. That single sentence carried months of pain, anger, and quiet resilience. Adrian had moved back home 2 weeks earlier. The house, once divided by suspicion and fear, now echoed with the sounds of repair, the tap of hammers, the laughter that slowly returned the clink of teacups on the kitchen counter. Together, we repainted the faded walls, fixed the garden fence, and planted a new row of lavender vines along the porch. Each seed felt like a small act of healing, a reminder that growth can still bloom from ruin. Sometimes I caught Adrian pausing near the window, his eyes distant, and I knew he was still grieving, not for Violet, but for the illusion he had once loved. One afternoon, Emmett stopped by with his quiet smile. He looked around the freshly painted porch, then at Milo sleeping contentedly by my chair. "You know," he said softly, setting his briefcase down, "justice doesn't always need noise. Sometimes it just needs someone brave enough to turn the camera on." His words settled over me like a gentle truth. I smiled, my voice steady but full of meaning. "Karma always finds its way," I said. "You just have to be patient enough to witness it." He nodded, and for a long moment, none of us spoke. The wind carried the scent of lavender across the porch, and I felt the quiet peace I had long prayed for finally return. That evening, as the sun sank low, I closed my journal with one last note, not for me, but for anyone who might one day read it. "If you've ever been used, betrayed, or silenced, don't stay quiet," I wrote. "Tell your story, because truth, no matter how deep it's buried, will always find its way to the light."